The room was beautiful. White roses lined the aisle in symmetrical perfection. The stained glass windows painted the floor in patches of soft color. Candles flickered gently in crystal holders. And yet, despite all this orchestrated beauty, there was something unnatural in the air, a heaviness that settled on everyone's chest like fog, too thick to breathe through. The music had stopped. The guests had risen, and she stood there at the altar in her wedding dress, still, silent, eyes locked on the man she was supposed to marry. He looked back at her, his mouth slightly open, a faint smile frozen on his lips. But there was a twitch in his jaw, a pulse in his neck that had begun to race. She wasn't smiling, not even a little. And that was when people started to feel it, that this wasn't hesitation, this wasn't nerves, this wasn't one of those awkward emotional delays that make people laugh about cold feet later. This was different. The priest cleared his throat. "Shall we begin?" he asked gently, his voice echoing through the quiet hall. Still no answer. She blinked once. Her eyes glistened, not with joy, not with fear, but with something older, heavier, something that felt like loss had calcified into clarity. Her fingers twitched, adjusting the grip on the small bouquet in her hands. White lilies, symbol of purity. She had chosen them herself. Now she couldn't stand their smell. She took a breath, not to steady herself, but to gather fire. And then she turned, just slightly. Not enough to walk away, just enough to face the crowd. Her voice came low but clear. "Before we begin, I need to tell you all a story." The tension cracked like ice underfoot. Some guests glanced at each other. A few chuckled nervously, expecting a romantic tale. Maybe how they met, maybe something sweet, something rehearsed. But the ones closest to her, the ones who knew her well, didn't smile. They saw her hands were too still, her spine too straight, her expression too calm. This was not a love story, it was an autopsy. She had walked down that aisle with perfect posture, head high, eyes forward, just like she was supposed to, just like everyone expected her to. But she didn't walk toward a man, she walked toward a truth. The groom took a half step forward, raising his hand as if to stop her, but she kept speaking. "I wasn't going to say anything. I almost convinced myself to go through with this, to pretend, to lie, just like he did." The murmur began, small at first, then growing. One woman gasped. A man leaned forward, trying to hear better. The maid of honor standing to her left swallowed hard and stared at her shoes. The groom spoke now, his voice hushed and urgent. "Claire, don't do this, please." She turned her eyes to him, and for the first time in weeks, truly saw him. His perfect suit, his practiced smile, his desperate charm wrapped in silk. She had loved that face once. Now it made her feel sick. "You lied to me," she said, steady and cold. "For months, maybe longer." "No," he whispered, panic rising in his tone. "Please, don't do this now. We can talk about this later, after." Her laugh was soft and sharp. "There is no after. Not for us." His phone buzzing at midnight. A perfume she never wore on his shirt. The look on his face when she asked where he'd been. And that one message she wasn't supposed to see. "She has no idea. See you tonight." "I wasn't going to say anything," she repeated. "I told myself it wasn't the right place, the right time. I told myself I should spare the embarrassment, spare my family, spare his." She scanned the room slowly, meeting the eyes of strangers, friends, family. But then I remembered, I've already paid the price, in silence, in humiliation, in betrayal. Why should I protect the man who didn't protect me? Her mother covered her mouth with both hands. Her father stood frozen, fists clenched. The priest looked helpless. And the groom, Daniel, looked like a man watching the ground fall away beneath him. "This morning I received a message," she said, raising her voice just enough to echo. "From a woman I don't know. She told me everything, The names, the dates, the hotel rooms, the lies. She turned to Daniel. She even sent screenshots. He shook his head as if denying the reality could erase it. "I made excuses for you," Claire continued. "I wanted to believe that love was enough, that maybe I was imagining things, that maybe I was the problem, but I wasn't. You were." Now the room was dead quiet again. Not even breath could be heard. This wasn't a breakdown, it wasn't drama, it was an execution and of lies. A funeral for who she thought she was, and a resurrection of the woman who finally chose truth over illusion. Daniel stepped forward, desperate now. "Claire, please, don't humiliate me. Don't do this in front of everyone." She smiled. "You humiliated me, over and over, privately, quietly, and now I'm just returning the favor, but publicly." And then she did something no one expected. She took off her engagement ring, held it up, let the light catch it, and dropped it on the altar floor. The sound of metal hitting marble rang out like a bell. She looked back one last time, as if closing a book she had written with her own pain, and she walked away, slowly, deliberately, alone. Some weddings are about beginnings. This one was about endings. But even endings can be sacred, when they mark the moment a woman reclaims her voice. From the outside, they were perfect. Emily Walker and Daniel Hughes were the kind of couple that made people soften when they walked into a room, not because they were flashy or loud, but because something about them felt right. Like two puzzle pieces that had spent years wandering in boxes they didn't belong in, finally found each other. Their story began in the most ordinary way imaginable. 5 years ago, on a Tuesday afternoon, Emily was restocking a dusty bookshelf at Crimson Leaf Books, a quiet, independent bookstore nestled between a florist and an antique shop. She worked there part-time while completing her degree in English literature. It was one of those rare, rain-slicked afternoons where the world felt like it had slowed down. Daniel walked in just as she was placing a limited edition of Robert Frost's collected works onto the shelf. He looked lost, like a man who had stepped into the wrong decade. Worn leather jacket, disheveled hair, and a canvas messenger bag slung across his shoulder. His eyes scanned the shelves with an odd urgency. Emily, intrigued by his energy, approached. "I think I have what you're looking for," she said, holding the book out gently, like it was something sacred. Daniel turned to her, surprised, and smiled, an unguarded smile that didn't reach his eyes but carried weight, like someone who hadn't smiled like that in a long time. "That obvious?" he asked. Emily nodded. "It's always Frost that brings the wanderers in." What began as a 5-minute conversation about poetry evolved into an hour-long exchange about music, coffee, solitude, and the quiet ache of wanting more from life than routine. He told her he was a software developer, but that he wrote poetry in secret, mostly on his phone, mostly late at night when the city was asleep. She told him she dreamed of writing a novel one day, but that self-doubt often curled up beside her like a pet she couldn't get rid of. That day, they walked out together, not because they planned it, but because neither of them wanted to be the first to let go of whatever strange magic had just begun. They were slow, purposefully so. In a world obsessed with instant love, Emily and Daniel moved differently. They spent weeks exchanging books and playlists before even considering a first date. She once mailed him a handwritten poem folded inside a used coffee filter. He responded with a typed note on an old typewriter, left at her door without knocking. There was something sacred about their rhythm. The first time he touched her hand, it wasn't during a kiss. It was while she was crying about her father's heart condition. Daniel reached out, palm up, and simply held her fingers like he was anchoring her to something real. Emily had known pain before, too well. Her last relationship had ended with her sobbing on the floor of a bathroom while her then-boyfriend texted someone else in the next room. That man had chipped away at her slowly, calling her too intense, too emotional, too much. She carried that shame into every new connection, like invisible scars no one else could see. But Daniel never flinched. He was patient, kind. The kind of kind that isn't performative, it's in the details. Like when he memorized the way she took her tea, or how he always made space for her in his life without asking her to shrink. On their 1-year anniversary, he took her to a cabin in the woods. No signal, no distractions. They spent 2 days reading books aloud by the fireplace, taking turns, doing nothing. That was the moment Emily realized she didn't feel like she had to perform with him. She could just be. 3 years in, he met her parents. Her mother, a strong-willed woman with eyes that missed nothing, studied Daniel for 20 minutes over dinner. By dessert, she smiled. "You see her," she said, almost like an accusation. Daniel nodded. "Yes, I do." Her father, quiet and a little more guarded, invited Daniel to help fix the old Chevy he kept in the garage. Daniel didn't know the first thing about cars, but he stayed out there for hours, asking questions, handing tools, getting grease under his fingernails. Later that night, her father took Emily aside. He listens. That's rare. And so when Daniel proposed a year later, under their favorite oak tree in Hollow Creek Park, where they'd first shared their fears about becoming their parents, Emily said yes, without hesitation. Not because the ring was perfect, though it was, rose gold with a tiny emerald, her birthstone, or because the moment was cinematic. He read her a poem he wrote just for that day. But because she trusted him, not with her schedule, not with her plans, with her whole heart. The engagement was a slow burn of joy. They didn't rush. They crafted their wedding together like a shared novel. Each detail, a sentence. Emily picked wildflowers for the centerpieces herself. Daniel handwrote all 112 guest invitations, even the ones to people he barely knew. They chose the Silver Hollow Barn as their venue, an old converted barn surrounded by fields and fairy lights. Emily said she wanted it to feel like a dream you almost forget, but never really do. And Daniel, he nodded, smiled, kissed her forehead and said, "If it's your dream, it's mine too." But beneath all that harmony, unbeknownst to Emily, Daniel had started drifting. It began innocently, or so he told himself. A friend from college messaged him on Instagram. A few jokes, some nostalgia. Emily found the message once, barely a thread, but asked nothing. She trusted him. He was always careful to delete things, always mindful of timelines, always quick to justify. And it wasn't tea until the final 6 months before the wedding that things took a darker turn. Late-night absences became common. Work stress, he claimed. His phone, once left carelessly on tables, was now always in his pocket. Password changed, notifications turned off. Emily noticed, of course, but love has a way of bargaining, of pushing down the whispers for the sake of the bigger picture. Because how could someone who wrote her poems and danced with her in the kitchen betray her? One night, just 3 weeks before the wedding, Emily stood in front of the mirror in her dress. Her mother zipped it up slowly. The silk clung to her body like water, and the veil caught the light in the room like a memory made visible. "You look like someone stepping into forever," her mom said, her voice thick. Emily smiled, but something in her stomach turned. She blamed it on nerves. She didn't know yet that the man rehearsing his vows in their shared apartment had also been whispering secrets into someone else's ear. That while she was choosing table linens, he was choosing excuses. That while she dreamed of forever, he was betraying her in silence. And yet, on the surface, everything was perfect, until the altar, where truth and performance would collide in front of everyone. The reception was a blur of white lights and camera flashes, of clinking glasses and muffled laughter that rang in Emma's ears like distant echoes underwater. She smiled when people expected her to smile, nodded when they spoke, and danced when she was pulled onto the floor. But inside her, everything had gone numb, except for the cold rage twisting around her spine. She hadn't told anyone yet. Not her mother, not her bridesmaids, not even Sarah, who kept looking at her with a puzzled expression, as if sensing something was off. Emma had been holding it in for 3 agonizing hours. Every second that passed added another crack to her composure. Her jaw ached from smiling. Her fingers twitched from resisting the urge to snatch the microphone and tell everyone what she'd read, what she'd seen. Every time Jake looked at her, she had to remind herself to breathe. He was too calm, too normal, laughing with his friends, wrapping his arm around her waist, whispering sweet things in her ear like nothing had happened, like he hadn't sent those messages, like he wasn't betraying her in the cruelest way possible, not with a stranger, but with someone who should have been her sister in everything but blood. As they danced their first dance under a canopy of fairy lights, Emma's mind screamed with memories. Not just of Jake, but of Claire. Claire, who helped her pick her dress. Claire, who cried when Emma found the venue. Claire, who once said, "I'd never hurt you, ever." The betrayal cut on 2 fronts. The man she was about to vow her life to, and the friend who had helped her plan the betrayal itself. Jake's hand was on her waist. He leaned in and whispered, "You look so beautiful tonight." Emma tilted her head slightly and whispered back, "So do you, when you're naked in Claire's hotel room." He froze. The song continued, but he missed the beat. His feet stopped moving. His grip loosened just enough for her to step back without it looking like a scene. To everyone else, it was just a natural pause in the dance. But Jake's face had drained of color. Emma smiled softly, calmly, not because she was okay, but because she had just taken the upper hand. She didn't need to scream, not yet. She wanted him to know she knew. She wanted him to feel the panic begin to rise behind his eyes, the same way she had felt her world shatter in that dressing room. Jake opened his mouth. "Em?" But she placed her finger gently over his lips. "Not yet," her eyes said. Earlier that day, replayed in her mind like a loop. As Emma wandered through the reception, the moments leading up to the ceremony kept haunting her. She remembered standing in front of the mirror, veil already pinned, bouquet clutched tightly in her hands. Her phone had buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Just one sentence. "You deserve to know before you say, 'I do.'" Check the folder. Room 218. Claire. She had almost dropped the phone. Room 218, Claire's hotel room. The message had no images, no threats, just that one line. But the sick feeling in her stomach told her it was real. Whoever had sent it wanted to stay anonymous, but they weren't lying. The rest played like a slow-motion horror film. Emma made an excuse to step out, walk the carpeted hallway of the hotel where the bridal suite was. Her heart was pounding so loudly she could barely hear her heels on the floor. She knocked on Claire's door. No answer. She tried the handle. Unlocked. Inside was empty, but on the desk, exactly as described, was a manila folder. Thick. She hesitated for 3 seconds, maybe 4. And then she opened it. Printouts, screenshots, photos, dates, hotel bills, text messages, nude photos, a calendar with certain weekends circled. It wasn't even subtle, it was surgical. They had been seeing each other for almost a year. Jake and Claire. At first, Emma wanted to faint, then she wanted to scream, then she couldn't breathe. She clutched the folder, shaking. For a moment she considered leaving, cancelling everything, running away and disappearing from everyone. But another thought whispered louder, no, make them feel it. She walked back into her suite with her veil fluttering slightly behind her. No one noticed anything, except Sarah, who gave her a curious glance. Make them feel what you felt. Now, reception, 9:43 p.m. Emma sat at the head table, her champagne untouched. Jake was by the bar, whispering urgently with his best man. Claire was nowhere to be seen, vanished right after the ceremony, claiming she wasn't feeling well. Emma knew where she had gone. She knew that Claire must have realized someone had exposed them. And now Jake was scrambling to hold the narrative together. She glanced around the room. All these people, their families, their friends, strangers who had spent hours to witness a wedding that was already over in Emma's heart. The question wasn't if she would expose them, it was how. She reached into her clutch, pulled out a flash drive. Then her eyes found the DJ. The plan began to unfold in her mind with perfect clarity. Later that evening, in the restroom, Sarah followed Emma in. "Are you okay?" she asked gently. Emma stared at herself in the mirror. "You're pale and quiet. You've barely eaten. You sure this isn't just nerves?" Emma turned to her slowly. "I'm going to ruin 2 lives tonight," she said calmly. "And they'll both deserve it." Sarah blinked. "Emma? What are you talking about?" Emma just smiled and walked out, leaving her best friend staring after her. The DJ's voice came through the speakers. "All right, everyone, if I could have your attention for just a moment, the bride has prepared something special." Every head turned. Jake froze mid-sentence, and Emma stood slowly from her seat, walking toward the microphone with the grace of a woman walking into war, not as a victim, but as the judge, the witness, and the executioner. Next chapter, the ceremony that should have ended before it began. The silence after Amelia's final words was thunderous. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The air inside the church, once filled with joy and anticipation, was now heavy with disbelief. Murmurs started to ripple across the room like aftershocks of an emotional earthquake. A few guests gasped. Others stared at Amelia with wide, stunned eyes. And Daniel, he stood frozen. The color drained from his face, lips slightly parted as if trying to form words he no longer knew how to say. Amelia, clutching the crumpled letter in her hand, turned slowly toward the guests. Her eyes were glassy, her face pale but determined. She was trembling not from weakness, but from the sheer magnitude of what she had just done. The power of truth had escaped her lips, and now it hung in the air like a storm cloud ready to burst. "I'm sorry you all had to find out this way," she said, her voice softer now but still clear. "But I couldn't go through with a marriage built on lies. He cheated on me. And not just with anyone, but with my best friend." Gasps echoed again. All eyes turned toward the front row, where a woman, auburn hair, high heels, and a tight-lipped expression, shrank slightly into her seat. It was Vanessa, Amelia's maid of honor, the one who had helped plan every detail of this wedding, the one who had cried during Amelia's bridal fitting, swearing she'd never seen her look so happy. Now, all eyes were on her. Vanessa didn't speak. She didn't have to. The guilt was etched across her face like a confession written in fear. Her skin turned pale. She tried to reach for her purse, fumbling, desperate to flee. But before she could stand, Amelia looked directly at her. "Was it worth it?" Amelia asked, her voice cracking slightly. "Was sneaking around behind my back worth destroying our friendship, our trust, my life?" Vanessa said nothing. Her silence was confirmation enough. From the altar, Daniel finally took a step forward, reaching out toward Amelia. "Amelia, please, let me explain." "Explain?" Her laugh was bitter. "You had 6 months of opportunity to come clean, Daniel. You watched me pour my heart into this wedding while sneaking around with the woman I trusted most, and you only looked scared now because you were caught." She stepped back, away from him, her eyes filled with fire. "You weren't sorry until this moment, until I made sure everyone saw the truth." Somewhere in the back, Amelia's father stood. His face was stone cold, jaw clenched. He didn't speak either. But the look he gave Daniel could have shattered glass. Her mother sat beside him, hand over her mouth, quietly sobbing. The priest, awkward and pale, stepped away from the altar. clearly unsure if he should continue the ceremony or leave entirely. Emilia turned to the guests once more. You all came here expecting to witness a beginning. Instead, you're witnessing an ending, one that should have never been disguised as love. Then, without another word, she stepped down from the altar. She walked down the aisle slowly, with her head held high. Each step echoed in the shocked silence of the room. The long train of her gown dragged behind her like a symbol of what was lost. The weight of trust, hope, and all the dreams she'd once tied to a man, now standing in shame. When she reached the doors of the church, she paused and looked back only once. Daniel was still at the altar, eyes wide, stunned. Vanessa had slipped out the side quietly, her absence barely noticed in the chaos. The guests remained seated, caught between sympathy and discomfort, like spectators of a tragedy too real to applaud. And then, Emilia pushed open the doors and walked out into the sunlight. But the moment the bright light hit her skin, a wave of something unexpected crashed over her. Not relief, not yet, but clarity. She could breathe again. Outside, reporters and onlookers who had gathered for a picturesque wedding were now pointing, whispering, lifting their phones in confusion. Emilia didn't flinch. Let them talk. Let the world know. She had nothing left to hide. Her maid of honor had betrayed her. Her fiancé had lied to her. But in that moment she had something neither of them did: truth. And in truth, there was power. A friend, her college roommate Lena, who had flown in from another state, rushed up to her. "Emilia, are you okay?" Lena's voice was trembling, her arms already reaching out to hug her. "I don't know," Emilia whispered into her shoulder, "but I think I will be." They stood there in front of the church steps, surrounded by whispers and flashes of cameras. Emilia, still in her wedding gown, now covered in emotional battle scars, was not a bride. She was a woman reborn in fire, burned but not broken. That evening, Emilia sat alone in her apartment. The wedding had been cancelled officially. The reception hall had been cleared out. Her phone was buzzing non-stop. Texts from family, apologies from mutual friends, even a call from Daniel she ignored. The silence in her apartment was heavy, but not suffocating. It felt like the first honest silence in months. She walked to the mirror. Her makeup was smeared, her veil tossed aside, but she stared at her reflection with something new in her eyes: resolve. "I'm not going to let this be the end," she whispered. And with that, she opened her laptop, deleted the old wedding registry page, and began to write. Not for revenge, not for pity, but to tell her story, because sometimes the only way to heal is to make sure the world hears you scream before you learn to sing again. I hadn't opened his phone with the intent to invade his privacy. That morning, I simply wanted to check the time. His phone was closer to the bed than mine. The screen lit up with a notification. One new voice message from her. No name, just her. As if my mind already knew who it was. I froze. Part of me wanted to lock the screen and pretend I never saw it. But another part, stronger, burning with a mixture of dread and rage, tapped the notification. The message began to play. "Last night was dangerous. I think we went too far." Her voice, soft, familiar, but not mine. "If she ever finds out, we're done. And not just the wedding, your career too. You know what people would say, what your family would say." Silence. Then, "But I'd do it again. You know that, right? I'd choose you every time, even if it's wrong, even if it ruins everything." The message ended, and for a moment, I didn't know if I was breathing. My fingers trembled. My body went cold, like every nerve had shut down at once. My first instinct was denial. No, maybe it was an old message. Maybe it wasn't even meant for him. Maybe it was just a misunderstanding. But I knew her voice, and I knew that he had been with her the night before. The rehearsal dinner, the champagne. He had disappeared for nearly an hour with some lame excuse about a phone call from his best man, my best man, Jason. The pieces started to fit together like glass shards, sharp and cutting. I needed air. I bolted out of the room barefoot, heart racing, as if outrunning the truth. But the voice played on repeat in my head like a curse, even if it ruins everything. I wandered the streets for over an hour, thoughts spiraling into 1,000 dark directions. People passed by, faces blurred by the tears clouding my eyes. I wasn't just a bride. I was a fool wrapped in white silk and stolen dreams. How long had this been going on? Did anyone else know? Was everything a lie? The weight of betrayal isn't just emotional, it's physical. It presses against your chest like a truck, crushes your lungs, weakens your knees. By the time I returned to the hotel room, he was still asleep, peaceful, like the world hadn't just cracked beneath my feet. I stared at him, my fiancé, the man I had loved, trusted, chosen. The man who had whispered promises in the dark and held me when I cried. The man who was going to vow fidelity and truth in front of 200 people in less than 12 hours. And yet he wasn't mine. Not entirely. Maybe not ever. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared out the window as the sun began to rise, lighting the city skyline with an ironic beauty. The day I had dreamed about for years was here, and all I wanted to do was vanish. But something stronger began to rise inside me. Not rage, not even pain. Clarity. This was my moment. This would be our wedding day. But the narrative? That would be mine to write. Later that morning, the suite was filled with laughter and champagne as my bridesmaids helped me into my gown. I smiled, not the vacant, empty kind of smile, a deliberate one, controlled. They didn't know. None of them knew. I said all the right things, thanked them, took selfies, toasted to the last single moments of my life. The photographer captured it all. The perfect bride in a perfect dress on her perfect day. But under the lace and diamonds, I was armor-plated. As I stood before the mirror, veil gently pinned into my hair, I whispered to my reflection, let them think they know what's about to happen. Let them all watch. Then I reached for his phone. Yes, I had kept it, and saved the voice message to my cloud drive. Just in case. The ceremony venue was breathtaking, an old cathedral with stained glass windows that painted light across the aisle like some divine brushstroke. Guests whispered in reverence, music swelled, and he stood at the altar, waiting. Jason beside him, both smiling. Of course they were. I walked down that aisle like it was a runway of reckoning. Every step forward was a step deeper into the fire, but I welcomed the flames. They were mine now. When I reached the altar, he took my hand. His eyes met mine, and for a moment I saw it. Guilt, a flicker, almost invisible. But it was there, the shadow behind the smile. The priest began the ceremony. People leaned in. The moment arrived, and now the bride and groom will exchange their vows. I inhaled deeply, then let go of his hand. Silence, heavy, pressing, holy. It wrapped around the entire cathedral like thick velvet, muffling every breath, every heartbeat, every ounce of expectation in the room. All eyes were on me. I stood at the altar, veil delicately framing my face, my dress a cascade of ivory lace, flowing like calm water before the storm. The priest had just invited me to say my vows. I was supposed to turn to him, my fiancé, look into his eyes, and speak words I had written in tears months ago when I believed in us. But now, those words no longer belonged to me. I didn't move. Instead, I reached into the bodice of my gown, just between the inner seam and the lace overlay, and slowly pulled out the small wireless speaker I had taped there earlier that morning. Tiny, unnoticeable, but powerful. The guests shifted in their seats, whispering, confused by the delay. He tilted his head, eyebrows raised as if silently asking, "What are you doing?" I turned toward the audience, and then I pressed play. The voice message filled the ancient church like a ghost had been given form. Last night was dangerous. I think we went too far. A ripple of shock shot through the pews. People gasped. A few hands shot up to mouths. If she ever finds out, we're done. And not just the wedding, your career too. You know what people would say, what your family would say. Jason's face paled. He looked like someone had punched the wind out of him. My fiancé, Nathan, froze. His smile collapsed. But I'd do it again. You know that, right? I'd choose you every time, even if it's wrong, even if it ruins everything. Silence again. But this time it wasn't holy. It was haunted. I turned slowly to Nathan, my voice trembling, but strong. That was your voice message, wasn't it? That was her, your best friend's wife, or maybe I should say our best friend. Isn't that what you called each other behind my back? He didn't answer. Couldn't. Jason stepped back, like the pulpit had grown teeth. His wife, seated in the third row, looked like she had been shot. She stood up, face red, jaw clenched, and ran out the door in sobs. My mother tried to approach the altar, whispering my name in panic, but I raised one hand gently. "Don't," I said. "I need to finish this." I turned to Nathan again. "I wrote you vows," I continued. "I poured myself into them, into us. But those words were meant for someone who valued loyalty, for someone who respected love. And now I realize they were meant for a man who doesn't exist." He tried to reach for my hand. "Please, let me explain." I stepped back. "You had every chance to explain," I said, my voice now rising. "Every opportunity, every moment leading up to this one, but instead you lied. You kissed her and came home to me. You touched me while tasting someone else." The crowd was breathless. People looked at each other in disbelief, horror, awe. I lifted my chin. "So, no. I won't be reading my vows. I won't be marrying you, but I will say this." And I turned to the crowd. I deserve better than this. Every person in this room deserves to know the truth. We dress up betrayal in tuxedos and flowers and pretend it didn't happen. We sweep lies under white carpets and toast to illusions, but not today. I looked back at Nathan. He was trembling now. He knew it was over. Today, the truth walked down the aisle, and then I did something no one expected. I removed my veil, slowly, deliberately. I folded it in half and handed it to the priest. Then I turned around, faced the guests, my guests, and walked down the aisle alone. Each step forward felt like shedding skin. My breath became lighter, my body upright, not broken, not humiliated, free. Outside, the sun was piercing through the clouds, warm and golden like some silent applause from the universe. Behind me, the cathedral doors remained open. I didn't look back. People would talk, they would speculate, gossip, judge. Let them. I had done what most people were too scared to do. I chose truth over pretense, dignity over deception, myself over a man who didn't deserve me. And as I reached the end of the long stone steps, I smiled. This time, not for show. This smile was mine. Weddings are made of whispers. Soft ones during vows, excited ones during the reception, drunken ones during the slow dances. But my wedding, the wedding that wasn't, was followed by a different kind of whisper. One that lingered like smoke in every hallway, every group chat, every church pew. It didn't matter that I walked out with grace. The world wanted fire, and it got it. The next morning, my phone was a graveyard. Missed calls, voicemails, messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years. Some were stunned. "Is this true? Tell me this is fake." Others were selfish. "Girl, did you really need to do it like that, in front of his whole family?" But the worst one were quiet. Just a name, no text, no explanation, just Nathan calling over and over. as if somehow, if I answered one time, the last 24 hours would rewind. I didn't answer. By noon, clips of the ceremony were online. Someone had filmed it, of course they had. A wedding with over 100 guests. Secrets didn't stand a chance. The video had no title, no captions, just me at the altar holding a tiny speaker, and then her voice. It took less than 12 hours to go viral. Reddit, TikTok, YouTube. People dissected every facial expression, every background gasp. The moment I turned and walked down the aisle alone was now a trending sound. Today, the truth walked down the aisle. It echoed through reels, reaction videos, duets. People called me a queen, a savage, a feminist icon. But I didn't feel like any of those things. I felt hollow, because after all the applause, I still had to go home alone. I sat in my kitchen that evening, still wearing the same clothes from the day before. My dress had been carefully folded and left in the hallway. I couldn't bear to throw it away. Not yet. It was still covered in the scent of lavender and betrayal. The doorbell rang. My stomach turned. I didn't have the energy to face anyone, especially not him. I peeked through the peephole. It wasn't Nathan, it was Jason, the best man, the other half of the betrayal. I opened the door slowly. He looked like hell, eyes red, shirt wrinkled, hands stuffed deep into his pockets like they were hiding something more than guilt. "I just need 5 minutes," he said, voice cracking. I didn't invite him in. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. "You want to explain?" I asked, arms crossed. "No," he said, "I want to apologize." I stared at him. He was trembling slightly, not from fear, but from shame. "She was my wife," he said, eyes welling up. "I trusted her, just like you trusted Nathan, and they both burned us like we were disposable." He paused, voice low. "She confessed everything last night, said it had been going on for months, that it started at a conference. I should have seen it. I did see it, but I didn't want to believe it." I swallowed hard. "So why are you here?" He looked at me then, really looked, and there was no agenda in his gaze, just grief. "Because you were the only one who didn't look away," he said. "You stood in front of all of them and said the truth out loud. I couldn't even do that in my own house." A long silence passed between us. He dug into his pocket and handed me something, his wedding ring. "I'm done too," he whispered. I looked down at the ring in my hand, heavy, cold, final. "You didn't have to come here," I said. "I know," he replied, "but I needed to. Because someone needed to tell you that you weren't crazy, that you weren't being dramatic, that what you did was brave." He left after that. Just walked away into the night like a man who had finally let go of a life that no longer fit. And I walked back inside feeling just a little less alone. The days that followed were strange. People began reaching out, not just with questions, but with confessions. Women telling me they'd stayed silent when they found out, that they wished they'd done what I did. Men admitting they watched the video and cried because they had cheated and now saw the pain for what it was. I became a symbol I never asked to be, but the truth, I wasn't trying to be a symbol. I just didn't want to start a life based on a lie, and that choice resonated. A week later, I walked past a florist near my apartment. The owner, a quiet woman in her 60s who had made the original bouquet for my wedding, stepped out as I passed. She held a single white lily in her hand. "I saw what you did," she said, "and I just want to say, you reminded me of my younger self. Before I stayed with a man who didn't deserve me." She handed me the lily. "You did the right thing." I walked home holding that flower like it was a medal. Maybe I wasn't alone. Maybe there were more of us than I realized. Women who had been burned but not broken, who had chosen dignity over silence, truth over performance, and who were finally learning that the altar is not the place where love begins, but often where illusions go to die. When Evelyn saw Daniel's mother, Margaret, standing outside her apartment door with fire in her eyes and trembling hands clenched into fists, she wasn't surprised. She had been waiting for this. The venom, the judgment, the slaps of shame that would follow. She opened the door anyway. "You disgusting little snake," Margaret spat, her voice cracking. "How dare you humiliate my son like that? In front of the entire family. Do you have any idea what you've done to him?" Evelyn didn't flinch. She stood there in silence, letting Margaret's fury pour over her like acid. The woman wasn't done. "You planned this. You wanted to hurt him. You've always been too proud, too clever. You think you're better than us, don't you?" Still, Evelyn didn't move. Not even when Margaret's finger jabbed into her shoulder like a nail. "You're a monster, Evelyn. That's what you are." And that was the word that cracked her open. She stepped back, her chest rising and falling with a breath she hadn't known she'd held for days. "Come in," she said, her voice flat. "You want to know the truth? Fine, sit down." Margaret crossed her arms, but entered the apartment. Evelyn pointed to the worn-down armchair near the window, the one Daniel used to sit in during lazy Sunday mornings, pretending to read while scrolling on his phone. The silence between them was thick, hostile. Evelyn didn't sit. She stood across from the older woman like a defendant on trial, but this time she wasn't going to defend herself. She was going to tell the story. "Your son isn't the man you think he is." Margaret scoffed. "Don't start." "No," Evelyn interrupted, firm now. "You came here, so listen." She walked to the kitchen counter, picked up her phone, and opened the voice memos. She had recorded her conversation with Claudia 2 nights before the wedding, the final confirmation of everything she had feared. She hit play. "I'm sorry, Evelyn. I never meant for you to find out this way. But yes, it was Daniel, the night of your grandmother's funeral. He said he was staying at a hotel because he needed space, but he came to me. I was vulnerable. So was he. But it wasn't just that night. It kept happening. We kept meeting. And then we didn't stop." Margaret's face went pale. She tried to open her mouth, but no words came out. Just the sound of her own daughter-in-law's voice, soaked in regret and shame. Evelyn paused the recording. "I found out 3 weeks before the wedding," she said. "I waited. I didn't confront him. I watched. I listened. I let him tie his own noose." Margaret shook her head slowly at first, then faster, as if trying to erase what she'd heard. No, Claudia is lying. She was jealous of you. She always was." "I thought so too," Evelyn said softly. "So I investigated. I went through phone records, messages. I confronted Claudia again. She begged me not to tell, said she thought Daniel would leave me eventually. But he didn't. He kept lying to both of us. So I made a choice. I could have walked away, quietly, but I wanted him to feel what I felt. The shock, the betrayal, the loss of something you thought was yours." Evelyn stepped forward now, her voice low but deliberate. "He destroyed me in silence. I destroyed him in public." Margaret's expression collapsed, anger folding into confusion, confusion into grief. Her lips trembled, her eyes red with tears she refused to shed. "He was my baby," she whispered. Evelyn sat down across from her. For the first time she looked tired, not angry, not victorious, just exhausted. "And I was supposed to be your daughter," she said. "I treated him like a king, Margaret. I made excuses for his coldness, his disappearances. I blamed myself when he pulled away. I thought I wasn't enough." Her voice cracked now. "But I was more than enough. He just didn't care, and neither did you. You called me difficult when I cried, emotional when I asked questions, dramatic when I begged for answers. Margaret looked down at her hands. The rings on her fingers sparkled like they didn't belong there anymore. "I didn't know," she said, barely audible. "No," Evelyn replied, "you didn't want to." The weight of silence. There was no screaming after that, no more accusations, just a long, quiet pause where grief filled the room like smoke. Margaret looked smaller now, older, and Evelyn, despite the fire she had carried all this time, felt none of the satisfaction she had imagined. "Why now?" Margaret finally asked. "Why tell me this now?" Evelyn stood up and walked toward the window. Outside, a mother was helping her child tie his shoes. Life kept moving, she realized, even when yours felt like it had ended. "Because I wanted you to see me," she said, "not the monster, not the villain your son painted. Just a woman who was hurt, who held it in for too long, and who finally decided to stop bleeding in silence." Margaret didn't reply. Her shoulders were hunched, her breath shallow. Evelyn turned back to her. "I never wanted to be cruel, but I refused to be his victim anymore." The older woman rose stiffly. "I don't know what to say." "Then don't say anything," Evelyn whispered. "Just see me." And for the first time in years, she thought Margaret finally did. The wedding was over. The guests were gone. The cake was cut, the confetti swept, and the tuxedo returned. But the video, that stayed. It lived on in the cloud, in people's phones, in hearts that didn't know the full story. Not yet. For days, maybe even weeks, Daniel had acted as though nothing had happened. He smiled beside me in the photos. He called me my wife, with a pride that made me sick. Every time I heard him say those words, my stomach turned. And every time he touched me, I flinched. Not because I was afraid, but because I was repulsed by the lie he was still living inside. He didn't know what I had done. Not yet. Because the real vows I spoke at that altar, they weren't the ones we rehearsed, not the ones he expected me to say, not the ones he repeated back with his hand trembling in mine. They were mine, they were true, and they were a warning. Let me explain. I didn't scream. I rewrote my vows, line by line, word by word. Each sentence, a blade hidden in silk. He thought he was hearing the same script, but he wasn't listening. Not really. Daniel only heard what he wanted to hear. Loyalty, love, commitment. But in between my words, there were confessions, twisted, poetic, coded messages of pain. I promised to love you, even through the lies I never expected from you. To stand beside you, as you stood beside her when you thought I'd never know. To forgive, not because you deserve it, but because I need the space you took back. To cherish the lessons, even the ones you taught me through betrayal. People applauded. They cried. Even his mother whispered, "She's such a pure soul." But no one heard me. No one really listened, except the camera. The wedding videographer, a quiet guy named Liam, was meticulous. He spent weeks editing the footage, slow motion, soft transitions, gentle background music. When he sent the final video, Daniel uploaded it immediately to his social media, captioned it with, "The most perfect day of my life. Watch our vows. They'll make you believe in love again." I didn't stop him. I wanted him to post it. I needed him to. It took 48 hours. Just 2 days before the comments started changing. At first they were normal. Beautiful couple. She's glowing. I cried at her vows. Then slowly, "Wait, did she just say, 'as you stood beside her'? Is it just me, or are her vows off?" Pause at 3:42. What did she mean by that line about forgiving what you thought I'd never find? It snowballed. A content creator on TikTok stitched the clip and broke it down like a true crime case. People began analyzing my every word. Someone added subtitles, another slowed down my delivery to catch the nuances. And then the title changed, from "Perfect Wedding Vows" to Bride exposes groom's affair in front of everyone, without anyone noticing. The video hit 3 million views in 5 days. Daniel's face turned from pride to panic. I walked into the kitchen one evening, and he was there, phone in hand, pale, sweaty. He turned to me with rage boiling just beneath his skin. "You set me up," he hissed. "You humiliated me." I didn't flinch. "You humiliated us first," I replied, cold and steady. "You just did it in secret. I did mine in plain sight." His voice cracked. "Do you know what people are saying about me online?" "Yes," I said, "and they're right." He slammed his fist on the counter. "This isn't justice. This is revenge." "No," I said softly. "This is clarity." Then I walked out. His friends stopped calling. His family, silent. Even his lover, the woman he thought he could run to, ghosted him when the video went viral. He was left alone with his shame, his ego shattered like the image he tried so hard to preserve. Meanwhile, my inbox was full. People writing from all over the world. "Thank you for showing that betrayal doesn't have to be loud to be powerful. I wish I had your strength. You turned heartbreak into art." I didn't respond to all of them, but I read every single one. Each message stitched a part of me back together. The truth is, the vows I spoke weren't just for Daniel. They were for every person who ever smiled through a wound, for every woman who swallowed her pain to keep the peace, for every heart that was broken behind closed doors. Those words weren't my vows to a man, they were my vows to myself, to never accept less than I deserve, to never stay silent when I know the truth, to never confuse being gentle with being weak. I left the house 2 weeks later, moved into a small apartment, got a new number, started therapy, started over. I didn't need closure from him, I gave it to myself. He tried calling, texting, begging for a second chance. He even offered a public apology. But no apology could undo what he did. Because I finally understood. Sometimes the loudest revenge isn't a scream. It's a whisper. It's a vow. It's a whisper. It's a vow. I thought it was over. The wedding had ended not in celebration, but in whispers, gasps, and footsteps that echoed betrayal across the chapel floor. After revealing Thomas's affair in front of everyone during our vows, I walked out with my head held high. But inside, I was broken, numb, exhausted. For weeks after, I went quiet. I deleted social media. I stopped answering calls. Even the friends who said they understood didn't really know how to talk to me. How do you talk to someone who just detonated their own wedding? My mother moved in for a while. She brought food, asked about therapy, and gently suggested I might move on. But I didn't want to move on. I wanted to understand. I needed answers. Not from Thomas. I never wanted to see him again. But from the one person who had been strangely silent through it all. His mother, Claudia. Claudia had once adored me. She called me her future daughter, gave me family recipes, bought me little things for the house. She was warm, involved, even maternal, until I exposed her son's secret. After that day, she never reached out, never called, never asked if I was okay. I couldn't let it go. So one grey morning in November, I drove to her house. When she opened the door, the look on her face wasn't angry. It wasn't sad. It was tired, like she had been waiting for this visit and dreading it at the same time. "Can we talk?" I asked, voice low, hands buried in my coat pockets. She nodded. "Of course, come in." Her house looked the same, smelled like cinnamon and furniture polish. But the silence between us was thick, like fog that didn't want to lift. "I'm not here to talk about Thomas," I began. Claudia raised an eyebrow, skeptical. "I mean, not just Thomas," I clarified. "I want to know why, not just what he did, but how it happened. You used to care about me, and then you disappeared." Her lips tightened. She stared at the teacup in her hand, fingers trembling slightly. "I didn't disappear," she said. "I just didn't know what to say. You were right, about everything." But there was more. My heartbeat picked up. "What do you mean more?" She set the cup down, took a deep breath, and then, slowly, painfully, she said, "I knew about the affair long before the wedding." It felt like the room spun. "You knew?" I whispered. Claudia nodded, shame filling her eyes. "I tried to talk to him. I begged him to end it. He told me it was over, swore it was just a mistake, that he loved you, and I believed him. I wanted to believe him, because if I didn't, I'd have to watch him ruin everything, and I just couldn't. Not again." I froze. "Not again?" She looked up at me then, and what she said next shattered everything I thought I knew. Thomas's father cheated on me. For years, I stayed. For him. For Thomas. And I always told myself, at least he'll grow up better. At least he won't be like his father. But he became exactly that. Tears slipped from her eyes. Not dramatic sobs. Just quiet, relentless grief. And when I saw the signs, I panicked. I thought, if I just let the wedding happen, if I just keep quiet, maybe it'll all go away. Maybe marriage will fix him. But it didn't, and you saw through him in a way I never could. I sat in stunned silence. The betrayal ran deeper than I imagined. Claudia hadn't just enabled Thomas, she had lived her whole life surviving betrayal. And now, history had repeated itself through her son. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, "not just for what he did, but for what I didn't stop." That night I went home with her words ringing in my ears. All this time I'd painted Claudia as the enemy, the silent accomplice. But in truth she was collateral damage too, swallowed by a cycle of secrets, pain, and self-preservation. She didn't protect me because she had never learned to protect herself. I spent hours replaying the timeline in my head. Every smile, every lie, every moment where someone should have said something. I thought the betrayal had reached its peak at the altar, but this was the root. A generational silence passed down like a family heirloom. And somehow knowing that brought me peace, because it wasn't just about me anymore. It never had been. A week later I wrote a letter to Thomas, not to forgive him, not to reconnect, but to free myself. "You lied, you betrayed me, but you also gave me the gift of truth. Because of you, I broke a cycle. I found strength in the wreckage. You don't get a second chance with me, but I hope for your own sake you learn. Because next time, the person you hurt might not walk away. They might stay, like your mother did. And that's the cruelest prison of all." I never mailed it. But writing it was enough. Months passed. I moved apartments, got a new job, started hiking again. Claudia and I spoke a few more times, carefully, quietly. She even apologized in person, with no excuses, just raw honesty. And then one spring afternoon, I ran into someone unexpected. It was Emily, the woman Thomas had cheated with. I froze. She looked just as surprised. "I didn't know," she said instantly. "I swear he told me you were over." I nodded. I didn't know whether she was lying. I didn't really care. "I'm not here to blame you," I said, "but I hope you learned something too." She didn't say anything, just looked down, and I walked away. She didn't cry when she left the altar. She didn't scream, beg, or break down. She just walked out, with her head high and her heart broken, but not destroyed. And while he stood there, surrounded by shocked guests and shattered vows, she found peace in the one thing that still belonged to her, the truth, because the moment she spoke those words, the lies lost their power. And the man who thought he'd fooled her, he realized too late. She had never been the fool. Some betrayals don't deserve quiet forgiveness. They deserve a spotlight. Has the truth ever set you free, even when it hurt? Tell us in the comments. And if this story shook you, subscribe. The next one might be even more personal. Send this to someone who needs courage today.